session. All right, so welcome again. All right, so we're gonna get started. I'll just keep us on gallery until the speakers start on. So today, it's really a joy for us for me actually, it's a pleasure to have us do this today, because this is a topic area that I've been wanting for us to focus on for a bit. This somehow always keeps coming up in most of our webinars to talk about our children and the mental health of our kids. And, you know, right from the get-go, parents are always taught how to, how to take care of your kids and how to raise your children to be healthy. You're taught about all the superfoods to incorporate into your kids' diets, make sure they're drinking their milk, they're eating their fruit, and all those things that, you want your kids to be able to do, why exercise is important, why they should go out and play. We do that, but there's more to a child's health and well-being than their physical health, than what meets the eye. A lot of times we may not be attentive to the mental health of the kid. It's just as important to attend to their mental health as it is to take care of their physical health. And I was reading a therapist's blog the other day, and she said that a father accompanied his 8-year-old son into her office and said, "I'm so proud of him for being so strong that he hasn't cried once since his grandmother died." And the father was very proud, but that was a shining example of how mental health strength can be misconstrued and turned into a toxic message for children. So that, mental health involves expressing, it involves acknowledging expression and validating how people are feeling. And I'm sure you've had, kids on the playground saying, "Stop being like a girl," and then these children are socialized to never acknowledge the emotion, never express themselves, that it's weakness to express the emotion or to even acknowledge, that they are struggling. But it's important for kids to know how to express themselves in a healthy way. Teaching, children to even express their anger is important. Their sadness, their anxiety, because anger is not always a bad thing. It's what you do with the anger that matters. But it's important to acknowledge that, because when we don't do that, it damages them, because it has to go somewhere. It either is absorbed into their bodies, it's channeled through something else that you think is acceptable. But it's important to be mindful of the things you tell your child or the children you're in charge of, whether they are related to you or not, how to engage, how to communicate the emotion, how to communicate when they're struggling, and how to acknowledge when they're stuck. And when I was kind of posting and promoting this event, I talked about how sometimes we may misinterpret a child's expression when maybe they're struggling academically, maybe they've gone through a traumatic or a difficult, challenging experience, and we have not given them the space where they feel safe to express how they're doing or how they're perceiving an event happening. And the way our kids handle situations, adverse situations, may not be the way we did. I like doing these webinars because it brings the intersectionality of culture, and spirituality, what is healthy. And if we don't get to a place where we have a good way of connecting those, it can be very, very damaging. And, I was reading some things somewhere about how some things we should probably work on not saying. And I know we have some really amazing panelists to come and share with us today about some of the things we need to be attentive to, but how we even praise our kids impacts their mental health. How you praise or not praise. Some of us did not receive praise because it was an expectation that you should be a certain way. So when you did well and you thought you went above and beyond, there was no praise coming your way. because, you know, and in full disclosure, when I was a straight A student, but I was taught, well, you got A's, what's a big deal? That's what you're supposed to do. You're brilliant, get your A's, that's your job, get your A's. Now, it was another story when I brought the B's home. But, you know, some things we should learn how we praise our kids matters. And if we have time later, I'll probably come back to talking about how we do that and what's the right way. Like, you know, when you tell your child you're the best in the world, that's a lot of pressure. Because when they get to high school, freshman year of high school or freshman year of college, and somebody says, well, there are other people who are also good, how does that impact the kid that you've told you're the best in the world, as opposed to telling them you're the best in my world? You know, the way I see you, you're the best thing that I can see, because it puts some kind of pressure on a kid. And so I'm just giving you like a feeler of some of the things we may touch on today. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first panelist today, who's a really good friend of mine, who I've been wanting to have come onto the webinar with us, Dr. Beatrice Adera. She's a professor of special education at Westchester University right here in the US. And she's taught at Westchester for the past 11 years. She's just a hidden gem there in Pennsylvania. And she actually serves as a chair of the department there. And prior to being at Westchester, she taught high school special ed. I really wanted her to come on because I want us to touch on some of those things. At Denton Independent School District in Texas for 6 years, and was faculty at Penn State in Harrisburg for 3 years. Actually didn't know you were at Penn. So this is good that I know that now. So some interesting things about her: she loves to travel around the world. I like following her quietly to see where she's been. She's a great cook, so you know I'm coming to some good food. And she has a passion for teaching and mentoring others. And since 2018, she's collaborated with special needs faculty at both Masinde Muliro and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University of Science and Technology in Kenya, which is so key to help revamp their special needs education curriculum. What a beautiful opportunity of partnership there. And she also facilitates different forms of parent training to empower parents with the knowledge and skills needed to support their children as they navigate, especially the US system. Those of you who are in the US, you just know how it can be tricky sometimes learning how to navigate a different educational system than what we went through. And so without further ado, I want to invite my friend, Dr. Beatrice. She's phenomenal, and I just want her to come and share her knowledge and have the liberty to just help us learn and get some tools here today. Welcome, my friend.
All right, thank you, Dr. Leo. So I'll share my screen because I'm an educator at heart, so I always have a few slides. So let me just quickly share my screen. All right, can you see my screen? Okay, all right. So our topic today is children's mental health. How are our children doing? And after the pandemic, I think this is a very important topic, whether we are dealing with children with disabilities or even just traditional children without disabilities. As a college professor and as the department chair, this summer I've been working with incoming first-year students, and I was overwhelmed. I was on campus a few weeks ago for orientation, and I spent only 45 minutes with them, and I was really overwhelmed in terms of their needs, in terms of just the challenges that they have gone through as a result of, there's some background noise. Yeah, as a result of possibly the pandemic and things along those lines. And I'm also aware of some of the challenges on the ground in Kenya because, as Dr. Lil mentioned, I partner very closely with the team at Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University, and I previously worked with Masinde Muliro. So let me just, this is just my quick agenda. I'll just touch on some sources of stress and mental health struggles. And I'll just talk about some traumatic life experiences, some things that sometimes we overlooked. We were raised in a completely different generation. So there were some things that just happened, and for us, they were not a big deal. But when we think of the generation of children that we are raising, our own children, it's very strange to them and it impacts them very differently. Even for those of us who were raised in a completely different generation, we had never seen the pandemic. We've seen all kinds of things. So the pandemic also had impacts on us. And then I'll just throw in social media because that was a big part of our life throughout the pandemic, and it continues to be a big part of our everyday life. And there are lots of stresses associated with that. And then just highlight some things to look out for as a parent, as an auntie, as a cousin, as just anybody. What are some signs to look out for? And then once I'm done, I'll hand over to our sister, Esther, who would pick up from there and add some more information. So this slide to me is something that I use a lot in a lot of my sessions with parents. And this was a quote from a school principal. And this was a quote dating back to 2017. And I believe in 2021, it's still very relevant. So let me just quickly read through it and then I'll move in. So a lot of kids come to school with an invisible backpack weighted with struggles, stress, worry, anxiety, trauma, unmet physical needs, loneliness, anger, sadness, and hopelessness can make them so heavy, too heavy for learning to happen. So there is no way that children can sit in a classroom and focus on learning if they are not regulated or if they're dealing with all these other issues that are weighing them down in this invisible backpack that they bring with them to the school. So I want to talk a little bit about some sources of stress and mental health struggles. So when we think about some general traumatic life experiences, there are all kinds of situations in everyday life that are going to impact all of us very differently. Some of us may have grown in households where some of this we experience some of these situations that I've highlighted on this slide, and some of us may not necessarily have been part of this. And at the end of it all, everybody is going to respond a little bit differently. So whether it is physical abuse, neglect and abandonment, and when we're talking about neglect and abandonment, it's not even a matter of like a child who is, when I think about the situation in Kenya, we have the little guys who are homeless in the streets. I'm not even talking about those extremes. It could be just even a two-parent household where both the parents are so busy and so absorbed with other things that the child is growing in this household with the same parents under the same roof, but they're still going through some element of neglect and abandonment. So the degree is going to vary depending on every child. Things to do with alcoholism, and that's a problem that is impacting whether in the US or even in other parts of the diaspora, and even in Kenya. It's a really serious problem. Things to do with homelessness and poverty, lack of basic needs. The pandemic really exposed the level of discrepancy, even here in the diaspora, where people assume that you're doing well, you have everything. There were people who were significantly impacted. In fact, last week, a friend of mine was sharing with me a picture of, just some friend, a member of our community who fell on hard times and was homeless. And she just bumped into him in the street. And for somebody to be this far in the US and then they are homeless, that's a very, very traumatic experience. And, even back at home, people may not be homeless, but just that poverty, the extreme weather, so they did not have a good harvest of crops. So they have lack of food. And then people were laid off and people were not working. So even these everyday experiences that have been part of everyday life for generations, they became more and more significant as a result of the pandemic that we just experienced. And when I think of when we go back to school, for us in the US, we're going back to school in August. And I know in Kenya, they're going back to school in 1 or 2 weeks. I'm just imagining some of the challenges that the teachers are going to be dealing with, considering that, teachers are not necessarily being trained using this kind of lens in supporting our children. So our focus tends to be more on the academics at the expense of the aspects that have a significant impact on the lives of children. So other examples that are more extreme, most recently we've had a lot of civil unrest. We currently have civil unrest even in South Africa. And I know in Kenya from time to time in the past elections, there was a lot of situations that may have caused some underlying trauma that just kind of went unresolved. Like you just sweep it under the rug and just kind of move on. But the reality is everybody's going to respond to these situations very differently. Extreme weather situations. In Kenya, I come from around the Kisumu, around the Ahero area. During the rainy season, there's a lot of flooding that happens and people's homes are swept off and all kinds of things. All those have significant impact on the children. And when we think about it, you're just supposed to just kind of shake it off and just move on. And nobody pays a lot of attention to all that. But on this slide, I have the most significant everyday things. Most recently, and I believe it's still even ongoing in Kenya, we have the rise in COVID situations. We have communities where multiple people have died. They've gotten sick and they've died. Some of them have died as a result of COVID. Some may have just died because of underlying medical things, because the focus is so much on COVID that people forget that, people have had, malaria and typhoid and all these other things. So, young children are part of these communities, and just to see people that they knew, even if they're not the immediate family, that is some level of traumatic experiences that impacts these children in the long run. It may impact them right now, or it may impact them in the long run. Stresses due to social media. And social media is something that has been in use in the past, but I think last year with the pandemic, it was even more prevalent because, you are all locked out at home and you don't know what else to do. So some of the terminology on this slide are just some of the social media lingo that I like to share. Like, there's this, the phantom vibration syndrome, where you constantly think like your phone is ringing, and maybe your phone is not necessarily ringing because you're constantly on your phone, you constantly have it with you all the time, and you're severely distracted that you're constantly imagining that you're hearing your phone ringing or things like that. Things like vague booking, where people put all these vague profiles on their social media and you're wondering what is going on. And you on this side, you think other people are enjoying life and they're having all these things going on, but then there's nothing going on in your life, or you're just curious to figure out what is going on. And then highlight reel also, by the time you're posting a picture on social media, I've probably taken 10 shots and I'm posting my very best. So I'm not going to post pictures of my worst moments. And then you're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, other people have it all together and I am struggling. Another piece is also the social currency of social media, where, people strive for the likes and the shares and all those things. And if your posts are not being shared, you're just thinking, you're missing out or things like that. And then of course, FOMO, the fear of missing out. And then also alongside with all these aspects of social media, there's the online harassment. All these significantly impact the mental health of our children. And even for us as adults, it impacts our mental health. So as parents, these are some things that to me are very important to pay attention to. So how does this manifest in our children? Because there's all these things that are ongoing in our surrounding, in our households, but what are some signs and how does it manifest in our children? Because as an educator, I know that behavior is communication. When people behave in a certain way, they are communicating something. And we were raised in a community or in a generation where you were expected to behave in a certain way. And if you did not behave in that way, then there was some type of consequence, which in many cases, you know, for those of us who are like 50 plus, it resulted into caning. And over time, I think we've gotten much better and stayed away from caning, but there are all other types of consequences as a result of the communication. But when we are talking of adverse situations that leads to severe stress and potential mental health issues, we have to rethink how we are supporting our children and how we are helping them navigate these situations. So behavioral issues, some things to look out for. And in the next series of slides, I'm just highlighting things to pay attention to post-pandemic, because it's really important. These are things that have been there, but more so as a result of this past 1.5 years that we've really been dealing with strange situations that we're not used to. So behavioral issues, either the child is overeating or the child is under-eating. They're just choosing not to eat at all. Lethargy or laziness, unresponsiveness or non-compliance. If you've had a child who has always been on top of things and they've been doing well, and all of a sudden they're not responsive, they're non-compliant, those are signs that there has to be something that is going on. Restlessness, unresponsive. And more extreme situations would be behavioral things like lying, stealing, or hoarding. Some sensory issues to look for, strong dislike of certain foods or textures, strong dislike to touching or engaging, or situations where a child regresses to sucking, biting their fingernails, or chewing to self-soothe, especially amongst the younger children. Just things to look out for. Avoidance of routines, and it usually manifests the more, especially with personal hygiene. That's the first one that you can tell that something is going on. Jumpiness, restlessness. The next slide just talks about emotional regulation issues. A child who gets very frustrated and have meltdowns. And I'm talking about something that's out of the blues, that's significant, that's ongoing. That's something that you need to really pay attention to. A child like that does not need a consequence. They don't need to be caned. You don't need to be sending them on timeout. It should be something to alert you, like something is not something is not adding up. What am I supposed to do to really figure out? Tearfulness, clingy behaviors, possessiveness or struggle with sharing, challenging bedtimes, lots of arguments, and they cannot see the parent's perspective. And all these behavioral issues that I've listed on this slide, they're going to vary depending on the age of the child, but these are just some signs to really look out for. Attachment issues, their emotions are bottled up, and then, it's really hard to reach them. And yet this may have been a child that was easygoing and things were going fine, then all of a sudden things have changed. When there are issues with boundary setting, there are certain boundaries that in the past you just set them and things were fine, and all of a sudden, when you're trying to establish boundaries, it triggers big reactions on non-compliance, episodes of distress, anxiety, anger. So just things that you really want to look out for. Additional slide on attachment issues. And these are things that are going to manifest in the classroom, especially when they go to school. Difficulty planning, organizing, completing tasks, difficulty with friendships, struggling with transition or any change from all of us So if it was a child who was just fine and they were able to get along with everybody, and all of a sudden you're seeing a pattern that is extreme and it is consistent, it is something that should alert you that, you need to do something about it, because they are communicating to you that they're struggling in a way or the other. And the more extreme would be situations where, hearing voices, frequent daydreaming or lack of focus, confusion about things, denying they are doing something and it's obvious that they did it, then all of a sudden they're not taking responsibility or acknowledging that they have done the thing. So those are just some challenging behaviors that may manifest on children based on their exposure to different things, and just some things that as parents or as even relatives, members of different families, different households, things that to look out for. Because the reality is, these are some of the challenges that may manifest at home, and they're going to manifest at school. And all of a sudden, you're being called to school, and there's no, when I think of some of these challenges that I'm highlighting, they have no boundaries. It's not like only in the diaspora, even situations for those of us in Kenya, children are exhibiting all kinds of challenges. And one of the things that did not make my slide that just came to mind, most recently, I've been reading a lot about school-age children who have just disappeared. And this was my friend, and all of a sudden they've just disappeared. So things like that are things that are going to impact our children a lot. So we really want to be mindful of these potential issues that may lead to mental health situations, and really explore ways to engage in conversations and really support our children and really help them process some of these challenging situations. So I'll stop for a moment and hand it back to Dr. Leo, and then later on we'll be back with questions.
Wow, thank you so very much, Dr. Adera. That was so rich of you to share your expertise in that area, and to just highlight some important issues that we may not have necessarily really thought about. I like how you just broke it down to things around emotional regulation, attachment issues, just how kids are expressing and highlighting the stressors that our kids may be dealing with, that their capacity or even their resilience level is not the same as adults. For me, since I interact a lot with college students, just like you do, it catches up with them, because now is when they get to some of us at the college age stages, when they realize that some of them have not learned how to regulate their emotions. They have not built their resilience. They have no coping skills, because the stressors keep coming, but there's no tooling and equipping of what's a healthy way of dealing with those things. And I like how you just highlighted those, and a part of it was like, wow, it's mounting. And I kept thinking, who's on the other side helping to give them the tools to deal with it? Or are they figuring it out on their own? Or are we so busy dealing with our own that we don't create spaces and time to give them the attention they need to work through those issues? And you're right. I've been seeing a lot more posts about kids missing, and I'm like, what is going on? And even here in the US, now more than ever, I'm seeing a lot of like, oh, so-and-so is missing. I had a nephew of mine missing recently, and he was found. But it just bothered me, because this was like a preteen kind of kid. And so I want us to kind of transition and continue with that conversation, because I have a lot of questions about what do we do now? How do we deal with this? The stresses are here. I mean, we turned out okay, I hope, but I'm hoping that even where we are also becoming more self-aware as adults. I'm looking at the screen, and a number of you that I know very well, you are parents or grandparents, and how are you helping the generation behind us to deal with those stressors? And so we'll segue. We'll have some time for some conversation, but I want us to segue to our second panelist. Thank you so much, Dr. Adera, for sharing that. laying a good foundation. And I want to invite my other friend, the two of you are on my mind to have you come on this time around. And I have been wanting as well to have Pastor Esther Karanja to join us. And I am glad that this worked out for both of you to come this month. And Pastor Esther Mwangi, sometimes we call her Pastor Esther Mwangi, Pastor Esther Karanja, is a really good friend of mine, and she is a co-pastor at the International Gospel Fellowship Church in Windsor, Connecticut. She is a mother of 3 adult children who I just love, and that were born and raised here in the US. It's amazing how quickly those kids have grown up. She worked for about, this is really an interesting fact about her. She worked for about 18 years at the state of Connecticut Department of Children and Families, where she worked in child protection and in various other units. She worked in investigations, in treatment, and as a trainer and licensing of foster and adoptive parents unit. Esther and her husband, Dr. Jeremiah Karanja, and are licensed psychotherapists, and they operate a private practice in Bloomfield, Connecticut. She's also a well sought out speaker in Christian circles, both in the US and abroad. She hosts a monthly breakfast meeting and an annual conference, namely Victoria's Ladies Fellowship, that I've had the honor of being a speaker at that conference. And I totally had a blast with the ladies and with the church. They're just a hidden gem, just like Beatrice is hidden somewhere in Pennsylvania. Esther is just hidden somewhere in the beautiful countryside of Connecticut. And, I just totally enjoy. She told me this was a true fact. She said she loves to laugh. And I tell you what, her laugh is infectious. Every time, this is disclosure, when I feel like, oh, I'm not feeling really great, or I'm feeling a little bit down, sometimes I just want to call her and then she starts laughing. She just goes like, hey, my sister, and then she starts laughing, and it just ministers to me. Your laugh actually ministers to me. She enjoys traveling, and when time allows, she's able to get around a lot. I'm delighted to have you, my friend. Just come on and speak to us today. Share your expertise, both personally, both of you have shared personally as well as professionally, that may help us to improve the community and the health of our children. Welcome, my sister Esther.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Rio and everybody else. And Dr. Adera, thank you so very much for laying such a beautiful foundation for us. I was enjoying, and I know I will enjoy some more as I'm sitting here and hearing that wealth of information that you have shared. And it left me saying, I don't know what else to say, because it has all been shared. Then maybe we can say the last amen, but we are not we are not gonna do that. So okay, may I say, I like to laugh. It's just who I am, and it's just my life. And sometimes I just don't know why, but God just built me like that, and it's just me. Now, when I was listening to Dr. Adera, I caught up on a lot of things that she was saying, which were very important. And one of the things I thought I would talk about is emotional neglect. Emotional neglect is an area that I saw a lot. And let me first back up a little bit. I have the honor of having had my children, all the 3 of them were born here. When I came to here, meaning in the US, when I came to the US, I was not married. I was straight from high school, and I enjoyed my girlhood without, here for a minute. And then I got married. When the kids were born, it was very difficult because I did not know which way was up. No support systems that were there to support. What I knew about parenting was what had been exposed to me growing up in Kenya, which was very different than what was expected here of me. In the middle of that, now I went, and when my children were just little preschoolers, and they came back to back. And so I got employed with the State Department of Children and Families. And that really changed me, It changed my way of parenting. It changed my way of thinking. It exposed me to things that I thought, had I not known they would have landed me in a lot of trouble. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit in regard to emotional neglect. Emotional neglect, when you see it, a lot of people do not actually even know what it is. And I also had not known what it is until when I got trained about it and I went to do the work. And when investigating cases, and some of the cases that would come, there will be a report sometimes on physical abuse. And when we went to investigate the case, you found a little bit more than physical abuse. There was emotional neglect. And a lot of people would say, what do you mean emotional neglect? These children are eating, they have a bed, we have a big house, we are doing everything we know for these children. How would you just even try to say that they are being neglected? And part of that is the impact of adult behaviors. Adult behaviors, meaning the parents who, parents, it could be, you might not be a birth parent, you might be somebody who has the responsibility of caring for a child one way or the other. And how that manifested, most of the times, for instance, if there was an issue of domestic violence and children are exposed to domestic violence on a daily basis, it might not even be daily basis, and it might not even be hitting the spouse. It might be that too, but it might not even be included. Sometimes it's frequent yelling at each other, verbal yelling, even, and sometimes it was also physical, where adults will be pushing each other and in the house and in the presence of the children. And there is a great impact. Sometimes it could even be much younger children, pre-verbal, and at that time they do not even know what is happening. But when there is the presence of that kind of behavior going on in the home, the children are exposed to it and they become very hypervigilant, because anytime the parents start fighting, the children cringe. They might be little, and you can even see that experiments have been done even with infants. And when there is commotion, that little child sometimes starts crying. And so before the commotion, the child might have been smiling and laughing and, doing all that. But then when you introduce chaos, that child shuts down and stiffens, and all kinds of things go on with that. Okay, now when that is done repeatedly, and a child grows up in that kind of a background, a child sometimes now starts acting out those behaviors because they are not very comfortable at home. And the only way they know to act is to act out. Sometimes what we consider to be bad behaviors are really not necessarily bad behaviors. Is the language that the child is using to say, I'm hurting, or I don't like what is happening. And the only way to express themselves is to go and do some of these things. For instance, if a couple, or if the parents or the individuals who are raising a child, there's a lot of commotion at home, there are arguments that are happening at home. That child, when they go to school, if they are of school age, they cannot concentrate, because if there was fighting throughout the night, when they go to school, their mind is not in what is going on at school. That child might be there and a lot will be taught, but it will be passing by that child. They will not understand what is happening because, they are preoccupied with what they lived last night at home. So what happens with that kind of a child? It's time for the test now. And they have not understood the thing. So the best thing to do sometimes is act up so they can be kicked out of class, because, okay, why sit down in a test? And that is the backpack that my sister was talking about, that the child is bringing with them because of what is happening. Okay, now this neglect, it's hard for somebody to notice it on the surface. Okay, when somebody goes to do that kind of work to investigate a case, and then you hear about some of those things and you ask, okay, how is this child doing at school? You talk with the school social worker, and the school social worker says, oh, this child has missed 10 days of school. Why did they miss out 10 days of school, or whatever number of days? Sometimes with some of these background issues going on, A lot of children miss school, they miss out on other activities, be it church or whatever could be happening. They are taken away from those things that are enriching to their lives. So a lot of neglect is going on there because a child is not developing. The child might not be developing at the level that they might be, they could be developing at because of the things that are going on in the background. And those are the background issues that really become such a big problem for our families. Okay, now this child, I'm talking about emotional neglect. A child that is provided for, as far as they might be having 10 pairs of sneakers, they might be having food in the fridge, they might be having other things, but this child is that child that can end up becoming dealing with anxiety. Why? Because now they don't know when they come back home how it's going to go for them. Because last night they slept and the last thing they heard was mom screaming. And so they are coming back home and just dwelling on one area because it's so broad. And they come back home, they cannot sleep, they go to bed, and they are just, the fighting starts next room in the bedroom. The parents are fighting there. The child is scared because now they have been told you cannot come out of there, or they know what will happen. The moment they come out of their room and go outside, they will encounter the two parents who might be charging at each other. And what happens when the child comes in the middle, most of the children get hurt at that time because sometimes they're trying to hold whoever is seeming to them to be most aggressive. It could be dad, it could be mom. And I've dealt with areas where a child is trying to withhold the hands of the aggressor and say, don't hit my dad or don't hit my mom. Then what happens? Emotionally, the parent reacts and slaps the child. And now it becomes physical. So now you are building up on from emotional neglect, then it becomes physical abuse, and then the whole nine goes on. So people end up now getting a case. If they are living here in the West, they end up getting a case with the departments that deal with that. Some of them are called Department of Children and Families or Department of Social Services. It does not matter, it's child protection. Okay, now how do you deal with that, especially when there are people who are coming from the diaspora? Some of those parents are coming from the islands. I deal with a lot of people from the islands who are my clients at the practice, even at the church. Our church is very diverse. I deal with a lot of people who are right in the systems that be because of something that they did without knowing that they were going to get in trouble. How do you work with such a situation where you have, it's clear that there is neglect that is happening? The parents are not open to even acknowledging, or the caretakers are not open to acknowledging that there is neglect or abuse, because as far as they're concerned, that is how we discipline, and somebody will say, that's how I was disciplined and my children will be disciplined like that. But then that kind of disciplining does not necessarily enhance the child's mental health, because the child, to begin with, is first of all going to the background to see what it is that is affecting this child that is said to be misbehaving. Because what we see as misbehavior, sometimes most of it, when you look at it, even clinically, when you're meeting with the parents, you find it's not really the child's issue. The problem is somewhere else. Talk about even those teenagers who are running away. Sometimes when you dig a little bit deeper, you find that the running away is not really just running away to run away from safety. They are running away from something and going to something more dangerous. It happens. I deal with teenagers, and not all of them. I'm not saying it's all of them, but there are a lot of things that are happening that do affect our children. So I think, to me, the most important thing to ask of us is with the caretakers particularly, to be able to alleviate some of those issues that can really become bigger issues for our children or for the children in the community, and not to see things on the surface. Because when that child comes, most of the times we just diagnose exactly what we are seeing right there. The child has ADHD, the child has this, the child has the other. And sometimes we leave that the background stuff there that is going on that goes untouched. And I find most of the times it's much easier when I cannot see a child in the private practice if the parents are not committed also to working on some issues. Because most of the things that I will see a child for, there is something somewhere that the parent can make it look better and work better. And without that commitment, I just let them know, no, I cannot work with you, with your child, if the caretaker is not also committed to the work, because there is work to be done on both sides. So I see that going on. So now what do we do about those who have open cases already? Because there are some people who have open DCF cases or DSS cases, child protection cases. What do you do with them? I feel the most important thing to do is be honest with them. We cannot hide under culture, because most of the times the things that we excuse and say is our culture are things that we can work on. And I do know, I really pride myself as a Kenyan. I pride myself with my culture, but some of the things that are in my culture are very detrimental to the well-being of a child or well-being of a marriage. So it's looking at those things and taking what is good for us. We cannot live in the area and say, oh, my parents, my mom did this, so I have to go. No, it cannot go like that. Because if we do that, we are not leading. We can correct some of the areas. We can take some of the things that are cultural, that are beautiful, and redeem them. There are some that are redeemable, but there are some that are not redeemable. They need to be tossed out because they are not going to help us in raising a healthy child. And take what is there that is helpful, and not just to be able to work on our families and be able to minister to them. Okay, now I don't know how much time I have, probably 1 minute. Let me 1 minute and then I'll pass it off to Dr. Real. Okay, now how, and especially our teenagers, we live with teenagers, and my children were all teenagers at the same time. I told you, I just got them back to back. And at one time I was like, whoa. But then if I had to do it again, I still would do it again like that. By God, I arranged it like that. I'm not telling you to do it if you're not ready. But with the children, the teenagers, there's a way we can work with them also to give them some level of freedoms that what we look at most of the times is when we put our foot down and tell them, this is the way to go. You are going to do this and do this. I said you have to go to a place of worship. You have to do it, and you have to do it. There's a way we can encourage them to make their own choices. You can make the choices, but encourage it to be, you can encourage them to do what they have to do and be part of their lives in a way that is helpful. And that is always a good thing, instead of forcing them and forcing their way ourselves into their lives. Am I saying we give them liberty to do anything they want? No, that is not what I'm saying, but we can guide and teach, and that will be much more helpful, I believe. So I'll pass it over to Dr. Real, so I'll not take all the time.
Wow, thank you so much, Pastor Esther. Wow, what wisdom you've shared with us. That was so rich. That, you just camped on the emotional neglect piece. Then how do we handle that? How do we manage that? I think that is so very important that we learn the how to communicate emotionally, because we know how we pride ourselves in how our own journey was or how we were raised. But like you said, that does not always work, especially when you're raising children in a different generation. I'm not even going to say raising them in the US, because from talking to some of you who are back home, whether you're in Kenya or somewhere else in Africa, with technology and advancement, how things were done 20 years ago is not how they're done now. I didn't have a cell phone when I was in high school, but these kids now have so much liberties, even at home. So I think when I had a dad session last time, the dad said that there's not a lot of structure of how to navigate autonomy for kids back home. Because back then there was just fewer options in terms of what you could and could not do. But now they have a lot more liberties, and there's not a lot of structure for some of them. And how do you navigate that parenting when you are parented differently? So I think it's so important to think about, like I was saying earlier, I was accustomed to not getting praise, because I was a good student. And so it was like, well, you're a good student, you should get straight A's. And I don't see anybody on this screen that went to, that was around me. I think I see Mrs. Chebet on the screen was with me when I was a kid. But it was those ones of you should always be at the top of the class. And so every time I was second, I got a whooping from school, not from home, from school, because it was like, how is somebody number one and you're number two? So if somebody got 100% and I got a 98, I got punished. And in retrospect, I'm thinking, so how was that going to impact my self-esteem every time I got a B? And actually, I did not realize how that impacted me until I was in college. Because when I got to college and I got my first B, it was like an F for me. I ruminated about that B for a long time, because I had been socialized academically to always be at the top. And so anytime I was second, I got the same, actually, I got the same punishment as a person who got an F. Throughout my primary education. So I was always terrified when I got one question wrong in an exam, because I knew that's a cane, in primary. Now, my headmaster and my teachers, they were well-intentioned. They thought that's how to keep you at the top. But I wouldn't do that to a kid now. I worked through my issues and my acceptance of what excellence means and the spectrum of doing well, so that it's not, because in college, really, that was in primary. But when I got to college and I got that first B, it really stayed with me for a long time. And every time I looked at my GPA, I saw, Beatrice, you're an educator, you're in the college system. And every time I saw how 1B impacted my GPA to, like, I know I'm really disclosing here, how the way it brought my GPA to like a 3.98, it was eating me up. And but then I realized it's because of what that man, that headmaster, God bless him, taught me, that the way to make a child better was to punish them for even the slightest moment when they don't get an excellent grade or anything like that. And so for me, my takeaway from that was, when I see a child, I want to, one of the things I was talking about praise is noticing the process, and not so much the end result. When your child is, or kids you're in charge of, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a mentor, whatever it is, acknowledging the process and not necessarily the end result. The end result is great. But saying, I like how hard you worked to get to where you are, rather than, you're not smart, you got a B. Or, you're not smart, you got an F, because that does not really help the child hone in on their skills and their abilities and their capacity to excel, and to know what their aptitude is. And I know I would want, both of you to come back and comment on this for different reasons. For Dr. Dara to comment on when you have children who have some barriers or limitations, or they have some special needs that we may not notice, and how do we approach how their performance is, and things like, especially and I know I'm saying a lot of different things here, when we socialize kids by comparing them, by comparison. Why aren't you as good as even a sibling? Esther, when you compare, Shiko and Joe, and you're saying, your brother got all straight A's, why is it that you can't? You are raised in the same setting, you get the same allowance that you do, you sleep in the same bed, we take you to the same school. But, the uniqueness of, because comparison can be so toxic to a kid because you're telling them they're better than others. It can foster narcissism for the kid who's really good, because then they'll also look down on people who are not good, because that's when I was saying earlier, you're the best in the world. But if you're always measuring their success based on the outcomes of other people, it can be pretty damaging to the child, because then they measure their worth by how good they are in your eyes compared to other kids rather than in their own unique abilities. So I'm gonna, Esther, do you want to jump in first, and then I'll have Dr. Dara come back and comment on the special needs piece.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Rira. Let me just remove the hand from there. See, what you're saying is very true. And I would say it's really risky. It's even more risky for people who have multiple children. If you have one child, you can do a lot of things and you have the liberty of doing what you want to do because that child is only hearing for themselves. But when you have more than one, and you have the others listening, and they listen one way or the other, whether you are talking to them or you are talking about them to somebody else, because sometimes we learn a lot from what somebody is saying about us to another person. Kids are very, very attentive. So they listen. What is mom saying about me? Mom talks about my brother who is always doing very well, or my sister who is always doing very well, but she doesn't mention anything about me. And especially now, it's even more riskier when parents are posting everything about their children. And I've seen kids who are coming to me and say, Mom doesn't post anything about me. And every time my brother makes these achievements, gets this achievement, Mom posts them. Whereas one child might be very gifted academically or in something that is so visible, there could be another child that is gifted in invisible areas. Things like kindness, peacefulness, brings a lot of joy to us. And that one child might be so kind that this child and might be failing in every other aspect. But those accolades, we don't give them those accolades for those other giftedness that God has given them, that they have. We only acknowledge what everybody else wants to acknowledge. So if you are posting about one child, you better be looking for something else to post about the other child, because it can be very risky and can actually be causing the emotional neglect that I was talking about.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Go ahead, Dr. Dare.
Yes, I'll just jump in. And I'm glad you mentioned, Sister Esther, multiple children. I have one child, 26, and it has not been easy because he's the only child, and it's like, why is everything being hyper-focused on me? And one of the things that to me was helpful as I think of what Dr. Lillian had said, I was never an A student, and I'm always quick to use myself as an example. I'm a product of hard work. I'm a product of consistency, and now I'm a full professor at a university in the United States. It's only God could do that, but then I also worked hard consistently. So I have never been one of those who is a big believer that everybody has to make an A. And when I do like parent workshops, parents are surprised, like, what do you mean? Yeah, you don't have to make an A to be successful in life. You have to do well and pass, but it doesn't have to be an A. So when I reflect back on raising my child, I did not necessarily push for an A, but we settled on a very reasonable grade, and we settled on 87. Don't ask me how we got to 87, but I negotiated and he negotiated and we arrived at 87. 87 translates into sometimes a B plus, sometimes a B. And so the goal was for him to get 87 and above. And that really worked well for him. And it made high school came easy for him because he knew so long as he got 87 and above, it was not a big deal. And if it was below 87, then we figured out what can you do differently to really help build this. So that's the other side. But the other piece that I want to address is when parents have unrealistic expectations on students, whether they have an underlying, and they may not even have an underlying disability with a diagnosis, but that anxiety can cripple children. And we see it a lot when they get to college. It's very different when they're in high school. And when they get to college, then college is very unstructured. And what comes to mind, I just did a workshop on Thursday for incoming first year students at my university. And this was a group that's on the spectrum. So their needs are a little bit above and beyond your traditional student. But one of the big lessons as I talk to them about faculty expectations is that college is very unstructured. And when we think of individuals who are on the autism spectrum, they love structure. They love routine. And then all of a sudden, we are now preparing them for a world that is very unstructured. But fortunately, on our campus, we have a solid program that really supports them above and beyond just them relying on Office of Disability Services. So the danger with, just having that expectation that you're the best, you're the topmost student is that they go through life thinking they're the best. And then they come to college, or even when I was a high school teacher, then the academics become more challenging. Then they don't know how to handle it. And they've not been equipped with the tools to be able to navigate their first failure. So what we see in college, even with first year students, it eventually spirals to even be a conduct issue or even a professional dispositions issue, because the way they approach it from that sense of entitlement. And then they're pushing the line. And then they really, before you know it, they've crossed the line. And then it just kind of spirals into a lot of other issues. Then the other thing for individuals with a disability or with a diagnosis, the big thing is just making sure that we are involved in the programming process. One of the things that sometimes I do informally is to show up with parents with a child with a child with special needs as a parent advocate for an IP meeting. And I usually show up for these IP meetings. I don't advertise myself. I just show up and sit. I'm a parent advocate. And they sit in and listen. And then I start asking relevant questions. And that's when people realize, she knows what she's talking about. And sometimes sometimes the schools are very surprised. But, I'm not going there in my role as Dr. Adera. I'm going there in my role as a parent supporting another parent, especially when we're working with the refugee population, because sometimes they even have a translator who's trying to translate from this language to English and then now think about the nuances of the educational system. But if there's a child with a disability involved, it's really important that you are involved in that programming process and that you have a good understanding of what is expected and just supporting. Because there are lots of resources, there's lots of opportunity, and everybody does not have to go to a 4-year school. Sometimes people start from 2-year, they make it to 4-year, and then they make it to whatever. Sometimes people just go to a 2-year school, and then, and back in Kenya, we are talking of a diploma institution, and they're still able to make a career path. So really working with the students and making sure that our children are pursuing things they're passionate about. Because one of the things that a lot of parents are very guilty about is you want to live your dreams through your child. So in your life, you had thought that I wanted to do this, I wanted to do that, and I wanted to do that. And then you're trying to really push what you had hoped to do yourself on your child, And that may not necessarily be their dream. They may not even be interested. Like my child would care the least about teaching. So I've never even engaged in that conversation with him because that's not what he wants to be and that's not him. But I'm very passionate about teaching, that when I find anybody who is even interested in any aspect of teaching, I just kind of embrace them under my wings and run with them because I just want to see more and more people teaching. So it's a matter of just really understanding what you're doing and of course reaching out and asking for help because these resources are everywhere. And thanks to Sister Lynn for organizing, these sessions are bringing us all together because I'm always learning something new from everybody.
Oh, wow. Thank you for that. Oh, that is so rich. I hope everybody's learning and benefiting something that you can take back to the community around you. As we begin to wind down, I have a question that I wanted to throw that in there that's very relevant. And if anybody has a question, you can put it in the chat box or you can just unmute and ask. But I wanted to talk about, especially since we're still dealing with COVID. We're not post-COVID. And there's been a lot of loss. And whether, like we mentioned, those losses may not necessarily be from COVID. People may be dying from, other illnesses or other conditions or old age or unrelated circumstances because death was here before COVID. And I wanted to ask, how do kids deal with grief? And how does that show up? And how can we as parents and as adults in children's lives, whether you're mentors, aunties, grandparents, how does a grief show up and how do we help children or even teenagers deal through that grief? So grief twofold, grief in terms of actual death of somebody passing away, a close part of the family, as well as grieving for relationships. For example, when parents have gone through a divorce or separation and a child needs to grieve for that loss of the family unit. Because I characterize that as grief when I'm working with kids, because they're grieving, especially when there is somebody gets full custody or whether it's partial, the fact that the family unit is broken apart and the child has to deal with, why doesn't daddy live with us anymore and all that. That shows up differently for different age groups. So whichever part you want to answer, the grief of actual death or the grief of some broken family relationships there. Pastor Esther, did you want to go first?
Yes, I recently did a conference for the USDA, the Seventh-day Adventist Church International Conference on Grief. And I'm doing a part B of it on the 24th. And grief is a real thing, especially grief in regard to death, because that is what we are dealing with mostly at this time because of COVID and all that. Depending on the age of the children, most of the children, the younger children sometimes have no understanding whatsoever of what has happened. And to try to explain it to a child, it's important that people use the right words for the children. For instance, the much younger children, if we use symbolic messages like, oh, they have slept and they wake again someday. Okay, now you are dealing with some serious issues when it's bedtime, because now during bedtime, you are trying to put this child to bed and you are telling them to go and sleep, and grandma is not coming back again, or brother or whoever is not coming back again because they slept and you told them they slept. So and now they start having what we could consider as behavior issues, but it's not really behavior. Sometimes it's because of what we have said to them, the words we have said to them. And the whole idea of death to a younger child, it's not even something that they can understand. So try to answer it in the most, to try to give them the most, instead of saying that it's sleeping, we can say they died, they are not coming back again, and they will not come back to us, but you will not see them again at home. Some children will say, okay, and because they might not understand, just go and go ahead and start playing with their toys, because they don't even understand what that is, because the concept of death is not clear to them. Now, as they're getting older now, that is where we have the teenagers or preteens, pre-adolescents. Most of the times when things are happening, we don't include the children. We do not tell them, even if the diagnosis of even something like cancer. Sometimes we do not include the children in the journey. We do not tell them sometimes what we have been told. We don't tell them auntie has a diagnosis that, and they have said they will be dying in a year. So as adults, we are more prepared for what is coming than our children. Because the children, we bring them in when it's very late, sometimes very late. We are telling them so-and-so is dying when it's probably a week before, or they even don't get told that until somebody has died. And they are told, you know what, grandma died. They don't know what to do with that, because we have walked with the journey. As we have been told, they got COVID and now it's 3 weeks and now they are in ICU. We know, and now they are intubated. We are kind of prepared. You can never be completely prepared for death, because death is a blow to all of us. But for some, you feel you know where things are, even though you don't know where things are. But the children, we might mention it to them, but we are not telling them what is happening. So when things happen, for most of the young adults, adolescents and pre-adolescents, they start acting out. Their way of grieving, most of them, is acting out behaviors. They might run and go to their friends because their friends are just being happy, and because they had not known what is happening, they might, and by the time they come back to now, their way of grieving is they will go to school and they will start having behaviors at school. But they are dealing, that is how most of the young people deal with grief. And depending on what kind of grief, sometimes young adults sometimes have a way of wanting to medicate that pain. We find some of the younger women, younger children, teenagers and all that, and especially if both of the parents have passed, or the source of their comfort and love has passed, a lot of them have a desire to have somebody who will love them themselves. So what happens there is a lot of them now start engaging in wanting to produce this child that is going to be their own, that is going to love them, because there is that emptiness. Nobody loves me. So I want to have a baby that is going to love me. So some of what we consider to be a bad child, some of those things are self-medication, because somebody is trying to look for something that can help them feel that level of love that they were having before.
Yeah. Wow, that's profound. Dr. Jared, did you want to add something on that?
No, I think she touched on everything.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is, I mean, I wanted to bring that up because I think we come from a culture, I'm looking at the people on the screen today, we come from a culture where we're not socialized to include children in the grieving process. And so we don't have the vocabulary, the language, the processes, the spaces where we can tell children what's going on. And as believers and people who are faith-based, we say that, your grandmother has slept. And that is very confusing language. And then if you throw in the cultural ways of grieving, it can be very traumatic for the child, for people to get really dramatic and grieve in a way that they don't understand, or, because we don't, most of the time, I think both of you alluded to this earlier, as adults, we don't allow the kids to see our genuine, authentic emotions, especially if it's negative emotion, whether we are sad or disappointed or or we are anxious or we are angry, we would shield the kids from that. Those of you who had families where there was marital discord, it happened in the privacy of your parents' bedroom. And when they came out, there was no conversation about this is what's going on. And so then we turn around, and when there's death and grief, for some would not, there'll be the other extreme of those who do not even bring the children to like funerals or burial ceremonies. And then you'd go to the other extreme of some of us, Dr. Dara, you understand where you have to stand at the grave and see them, put them in the ground, but there's no conversation about it. And I'm self-disclosing to you all to just talk about my own grief process in terms of losing both of my parents when I was under 10 years old. But in retrospect, there was no conversation, wonderful Luo people. We never talked about what are we going to do with these kids who have lost, the most consistent adults in their lives. And so for me, I'm like, I don't want to see other kids go through that. Can we just have a conversation and say, mommy's gone, mommy's not coming back. Therefore, your life is going to take a different shape, and then creating space for how is a child feeling? What do they want to say? And for those of you, I'm seeing a lot of therapists on here, finding ways to create space for kids to communicate that. Those of you who do like art therapy, to engage kids in finding an avenue to be able to put that somewhere and pacing them. And today we won't even touch on how the adults are grieving, without there's just so much there in terms of, do we over spiritualize the grief or do we suppress the grief? But more like, how does that impact the children? Pastor Esther, you had your hand raised. Did you want to add something onto that? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, just a quick thing. Sometimes what really complicates grief is, especially if the person who is deceased has done something really negative to the person who is left behind, because they're still expected to grieve. They're still expected to grieve, where to them is they are breathing a sigh of relief because of what has happened. But they cannot say anything to anybody, because we live in a culture that you don't say anything negative about somebody who is deceased. So there's that turmoil and that conflict, because now I'm happy that Uncle so-and-so who has been molesting me is gone, but I cannot say that, because if I try to say that to anybody, they're going to think I'm an ungrateful child, because Uncle has been taking care of me and has been buying me all these kinds of things. So a lot of complications to grief.
Wow. We'll definitely have another conversation around just the processing of grief. But right now, I see a lot of really great experts on here. I don't know if any of you wanted to contribute to the conversation in one way. Ma'am Chebet, I see you on there. Did you want to say something? I don't know if you're in a position to speak. I know you've done some work on grief and supporting people who are grieving.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lillian. Yes, I can. Actually, they have said mostly what I would say, but basically, when people are going through grief, especially here in Kenya, it depends on what culture you're coming from. Because I realize, even as I do my debriefing, when I'm counseling people who are going through grief and loss and grief, people actually grieve differently. There are people who put emotions into it. And speaking from the culture that I come from, like the Kalenjins, we don't express our emotions. Like maybe if I can use maybe the Luos, the Luyas, theirs is more, they do it using a lot of emotions. But for us, as the Kalenjins, um, we don't express them. It's not more of physical. So I think for us as therapists, even as we really give therapy to people who are dealing with loss and grief, we need to internalize as therapists that people grieve differently. And we need to do what we call, there's a course that I did in my master's, and part of it is what we call the multicultural, learning about people's cultures. How do people address some issues? And so I'm just bringing the aspect of the cultures that where people are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I like what, I like what Pastor Esther said. In the U.S. or in the Western world, when somebody has died, you don't bring those aspects of the negative part of the people. And I think also here in Kenya, we don't like, even when you go to the funerals, they normally talk about the goodness of people, not the negative part of what people were. But for us as therapists, I think that is an aspect that we need to, even when we are doing debriefing on people who have lost their loved ones, those are some of the things that we need to allow them to expose them in therapy, or when you are doing debriefing for them,
Mm-hmm.
that allow those issues to come up. You know, ask them, let's talk about the person, what can you say about the person? And
Mm,
allow them to talk about the positive and the negative aspects of the people.
exactly.
Yeah. So I think that is what I can do for now. Maybe another time when we have time, we might talk on other issues. But
Mm,
thank you very much for those of the panelists who were there tonight. You really did a great job. Sorry I came in late because I had gone into town. And then when I was trying to connect, I couldn't connect as fast as I thought I would.
mm,
But really, that was great. That was very great, especially dealing with the children. I have grown up children, and what you are giving is really very passionate for me,
mm.
because I have so many children all over the world. So thank you very much. And the input
Yeah.
also from Dr. Adera, that was great. And what you're doing also, Dr. Lily, that's very powerful,
Mm.
connecting us as therapists. And I'm sure we'll have one session when we will debrief ourselves on the losses and things that we have been going through as therapists and as psychologists. Sometimes maybe we need a moment to just debrief ourselves,
Oh, yeah.
because we go through so much and we handle so much. And it is difficult sometimes, even when you yourself, you're grieving, and you yourself, you're going through loss and grief, yet you have to handle people who are going through the same.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we need to go through those for ourselves. Otherwise, thank you so much for that moment of allowing me to say what I could for now. I am
Oh.
coming from school right now. So thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to invite you in because I know some of the work that even when I was a kid, and when I was, even before I pursued the work I'm doing in this field, you're one of those people that I watched providing counsel to people in the ministry office. And I remember how we would be scared of going in there because it was this mysterious experience of, you have to go and talk to Mrs. Chebet, and what are you talking about? but you recognize that you needed to create a space for some of us to come and have one-on-ones with you, and just talk. And we're like, talk about what? But I want to let you know that you inspired me to do some of this work that I'm doing now. And you have worked with a lot of people through grief. And so I intentionally called on you to do that. You're a trailblazer in your own way, even as you do your doctoral work right now. I know our time has elapsed, and we are opening a can of worms to talk about grief, which is really huge. I think we'll circle back to doing that. A friend of mine the other day, who's a gospel artist in Kenya, the other day just opened up her Instagram and asked people to share what they've been dealing with and some of the difficult things they've been dealing with. And this particular person just had a very significant loss of a newborn recently. So I'm mindful that this person was already dealing with their own grief. And I would imagine part of their dealing with their grief, they said on their Instagram, hey, what are people dealing with? And it was a Pandora's box. By the time I logged onto that Instagram, there were about 400 people who had posted some really, really intense traumatic experiences, like really major stuff. And I couldn't even read all of them. And I just thought of, most of these people were really in Kenya. And I thought of just the trauma and the people are dealing with. And I had to go back and tell her, make sure you're taking care of yourself, because that's a lot to take in. And those of you who are providers on here, it would have been a lot. I think Esther has logged off, but she's a trauma therapist. I had to tell her, make sure you're taking care of yourself, and please, can we direct these people to get help somewhere else? So she had to go back and post places for people to get that. And some of those were just trauma that in our culture, we are not allowed to talk about. You're not allowed to mention, like Pastor Esther, you mentioned that, hey, my uncle, who's everybody's favorite, has been molesting me. You cannot say that, because are they going to believe a child over, a very prominent, influential adult? And people started putting that stuff. I was actually surprised at how candid they were on Instagram and putting that stuff on there. And I was reading it and I was like, this is a lot. So I plugged in the work we're doing here. But then I also thought about all of you providers. So this is a good segue to talk about, once every last Saturday of the month, we meet as providers, those of you on here, so we can also debrief. We can also just process what we are carrying for other people and create a space for us to also talk about how we're doing. You don't have to be a licensed provider. You don't have to be practicing. You may just be somebody who's in that role, whether in ministry or as an educator or a support system. And you can come and we can talk together. But our regular webinars that are open to everybody continue every second, sometimes like this time, a third Saturday of the month. And so without saying much more, I would probably give a minute to our panelists if you have any last words. Dr. Dara, did you have any last words before we wrap up the webinar this afternoon?
No, just to say thank you for the opportunity, but just one thing for all of us to remember is that when we see behavior manifesting, it is a form of communication. Yes. So instead of asking our children, what's wrong with you? We need to dig in and figure out what happened to you. And then that's the only way for us to scoop in and really try to dig in and support them, because it's a lot. And when your brain is not regulated, you cannot learn. Regardless of whether you're caned or grounded, you will not learn. Your brain has to be regulated so that you can focus.
I like that. Not what's wrong with you. What is happening? What's going on with you? I like that. Pastor Esther.
Yeah, I would want to say first or last for, I don't know whether it's first or last. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Rio, for the invitation to be here, and for you being so consistent and doing this beautiful work. Really, it's beautiful and it's enhancing our communities and us as individuals. So thank you for doing that and having this platform that is so beautiful and so many that have logged in. It is a platform to support in every way. What I would want to say is let's ask more than how are you doing, and just wait a little bit and ask the next question. How are you really doing? How are you really doing? Because how are you doing is just, yeah, good. But how are you really doing? And look at somebody straight and let them, give them a minute to answer. It means a lot. You'll be surprised how much comes out with how are you really doing? God bless you.
Oh, I love that. How are you really doing? And receive, I will add on to that and say, and receive the response and believe the response that you get when you ask that, whether it's a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, 25-year-old, watch how you hold that for them, whatever they say when you ask, how are you really doing? Because we've gone from, don't ask, what was it you said? What's wrong with you? Say, what is going on with you? How are you really doing? And then they will open up and give you something. And whatever they give you, hold it, validate it. It's their experience. Don't tell them it's not a big deal. Or don't turn around and say, even me, I've been through that and I made it through. It's their experience, validate it. I've had some parents tell kids, oh, you'll get over that puppy love, first love thing, just get over it. No, it's their experience. It's their little heart that's been broken, you know? And so just hold it for them. Don't say it's not a big deal. Don't tell them stop crying. Don't shut down the emotion. Don't disappear them. Also, don't tell them everything will be okay. I know that's contradictory to what we are taught to say. Everything is going to be okay. That's very broad. It just be supportive and say, I'm going to walk with you through this journey. You know, it's natural that you want to reassure them to calm their fears, but you can't protect them from everything. Sometimes they have to just journey through the trenches and tell them, I will walk with you. It may be a rough way back for us to get back to your baseline, but I'm going to be here. I see Mama Nesta, you turned your camera on. That always tells me you want to say something. You're just a hero in this group. I love that you always show up. Do you have something to say? Oh, you're on mute, Mama. Let's see if we can get your audio on. Now we lost your video and your audio.
Okay, thank you. I'm so happy and delighted to be in this forum. This is what we need at this time because everybody is emotionally affected. The grown-ups will speak, the children are left to fend for themselves and they are trodden on. And it's good, very, very important that both the presenters and even you have commented on very, very important things of emotions and the support and all what we can do for children and even for ourselves because children are left with nobody. In fact, just today I had some workers who are working here and there was one person who said in a place where he has rented a house, the tenants keep fighting every day and they didn't see any need of evacuating those people to give them a notice. And then today I sat with those two men and I asked them, do you see what role model you bring to the children? This affects the children. They will be left with a lot of painful emotions and experiences which would affect them all their lives. So what you are talking and what you are needing, we need to leave our to be models for the children and we act in a way that you'll be able to help them. And I really appreciate all what has been shared, and we look forward to working together and support, and also live to work with the children to make a better world. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Mama. We appreciate your consistency also in showing up and bringing wisdom both to this group and also to the providers webinar and the provider circle that we have every month. Thank you so very much. At this time, I want to just wrap us up. I want to appreciate even the providers who are here. We will see you in 2 weeks. And for everybody else, we will see you next month for our next webinar. The recording is going to be available. I will send it via email, and I'll also post it on social media so that you can, if you need to share it with other people who are not on social media, I'm going to put it on my YouTube channel so you can extract that and email it to people as you so please. I'm grateful for the work that you all are continuing to do. I see you, even, I celebrate you, and continue supporting people even through these challenging times we are in. It's one life at a time. That one life is what makes the village. So keep pressing on, keep doing it, and hold your head up. And when you need help, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day.